So this was a hard talk to prepare because I had nothing to say. So I decided to start with something I'd read a while back when I was using this book, Thich Nhat Hanh's The Miracle of Mindfulness, to prepare for a couple of talks or to use in a couple of talks the last time I spoke. And I ran across this story that was just beautiful, but too long to include in any of the talks I'd already prepared. And I'm going to start out with it because I think it adds a great deal, or it did, to my understanding of some lines from the merging of difference in unity that I'd been struggling to understand, articulate, whatever. This story really helps, or helped me, since I really had such a hard time with, as Steve pointed to, the non-difference of relativity and absolute, or the non-difference of relativity and absolute. I'm sorry. Relative and absolute, yes. I'm off to a great start. Okay, and I attended that class, all 6 of them. Anyway, so this is, according to Thich Nhat Hanh, a story from Tolstoy, whom he refers to as a bodhisattva. I've never read any Tolstoy. I've not read War and Peace, and I've not read Anna Karenina, but I've heard they're magnificent. But anyway, this is a great story. The story of the emperor's 3 questions. Tolstoy did not know the emperor's name. One day, it occurred to a certain emperor that if he only knew the answers to 3 questions, he would never stray in any matter. Isn't that interesting? The 3 questions are, what is the best time to do each thing? Who are the most important people to work with? What is the most important thing to do at all times? So from this, I gathered that this is a rather unusual ruler to ask these questions. They suggest a man who's interested in, for lack of a better expression, acting out of wholeness, trying to do the right thing, even if he's not aware that that's what he's trying to do. So the emperor issues a decree. He's a very democratic emperor throughout his kingdom, announcing that whoever could answer the questions would receive a great reward. Many who read the decree made their way to the palace at once, each person with a different answer. In reply to the first question, which was, what is the best time to do each thing? One person advised that the emperor make up a thorough time schedule, consecrating every hour, day, month, and year for certain tasks, and then follow the schedule to the letter. Only then could he hope to do every task at the right time. Doesn't this sound like a New Year's resolution to you? It did to me. So another person replied that it was impossible to plan in advance and that the emperor should put all vain amusements aside and remain attentive to everything in order to know what to do at what time. How does one define vain amusements, first of all? And how does one remain attentive to everything? Anyway, so the emperor rejects this. Someone else insisted that by himself, the emperor could never hope to have all the foresight and competence necessary to decide when to do each and every task. And what he really needed to do was set up a council of the wise and then to act according to their advice. He rejects this. Someone else said that certain matters required immediate decision and could not wait for consultation. But if he wanted to know in advance what was going to happen, can we know in advance what's going to happen? He should consult magicians and soothsayers. He rejects this as well. The responses to the second question also lacked accord or unanimity. The second question is, who are the most important people to work with? One person said that the emperor needed to place all of his trust in administrators, which he rejects. Good. Another urged reliance on priests and monks, while others recommended physicians. Still others put their faith in warriors. Again, he rejects all of these. The third question drew a similar variety of answers. The third question was, what is the most important thing to do at all times? Some said, interestingly, science was the most important pursuit. Others insisted on religion, yet others claimed the most important was military skill. He rejected all of those as well. And the emperor gave no reward because he was not pleased with any of these answers. I find that very interesting. After several nights of reflection, the emperor resolved to visit a hermit who lived up on the mountain and was said to be an enlightened man. The emperor wished to find the hermit to ask him the three questions, though he knew the hermit never left the mountains and was known to receive only the poor, refusing to have anything to do with persons of wealth or power. So the emperor disguised himself as a simple peasant and ordered his attendants to wait for him at the foot of the mountain while he climbed the slope alone to seek the hermit. Reaching the holy man's dwelling place, the emperor found the hermit digging a garden in front of his hut. When the hermit saw the stranger, he nodded his head in greeting and continued to dig. The labor was obviously hard on him. He was an old man, and each time he thrust his spade into the ground to turn the earth, he heaved heavily. The emperor approached him and said, "I've come here to ask your help with three questions. When is the best time to do each thing? Who are the most important people to work with? What is the most important thing to do at all times?" The hermit listened attentively, but only patted the emperor on the shoulder and continued digging. The emperor said, "You must be tired. Here, let me give you a hand with that." The hermit thanked him, handed the emperor the spade, and sat down on the ground to rest. After he had dug 2 rows, the emperor stopped and turned to the hermit and repeated his 3 questions. The hermit still did not answer, but instead stood up and pointed to the spade and said, "Why don't you rest now? I can take over again." But the emperor continued to dig. 1 hour passed, then 2. Finally, the sun began to set behind the mountain. The emperor put down the spade and said to the hermit, "I came here to ask if you could answer my 3 questions. But if you can't give me any answers, please let me know so I can get on my way home." The hermit lifted his head and asked the emperor, "Do you hear someone running over there?" The emperor turned his head. They both saw a man with a long white beard emerge from the woods. He ran wildly, pressing his hands against a bloody wound on his stomach. The man ran toward the emperor before falling unconscious to the ground, where he lay groaning. Opening the man's clothing, the emperor and the hermit saw that the man had received a deep gash. The emperor cleaned the wound thoroughly and then used his own shirt to bandage it, but the blood completely soaked it within minutes. He rinsed the shirt out and bandaged the wound a second time and continued to do so until the flow of blood had stopped. At last, the wounded man regained consciousness and asked for a drink of water. The emperor ran down to the stream and brought back a jug of fresh water. Meanwhile, the sun had disappeared and the night air had begun to turn cold. The hermit gave the emperor a hand in carrying the man into the hut, where they laid him down on the hermit's bed. The man closed his eyes and lay quietly. The emperor was worn out from a long day of climbing the mountain and digging the garden. Leaning against the doorway, he fell asleep. When he rose, the sun had already risen over the mountain. For a moment, he forgot where he was and what he had come here for. He looked over to the bed and saw the wounded man, and also looking around him in confusion. When he saw the emperor, he stared at him intently and then said in a faint whisper, "Please forgive me." "But what have you done that I should forgive you?" the emperor asked. "You do not know me, your majesty, but I know you. I was your sworn enemy, and I had vowed to take vengeance on you for during the last war, you killed my brother and seized my property. When I learned that you were coming alone to the mountain to meet the hermit, I resolved to surprise you on your way back and kill you. But after waiting a long time, there was still no sign of you, and so I left my ambush in order to seek you out. But instead of finding you, I came across your attendants who recognized me and gave me this wound. Luckily, I escaped and ran here. If I hadn't met you, I would surely be dead by now. I had intended to kill you, but instead you saved my life. I am ashamed and grateful beyond words. If I live, I vow to be your servant for the rest of my life, and I will bid my children and grandchildren to do the same. Please grant me your forgiveness." The emperor was overjoyed to see that he was so easily reconciled with a former enemy. He not only forgave the man, but promised to return all the man's property and to send his own physicians and servants to wait on the man until he was completely healed. After ordering his attendants to take the man home, the emperor returned to see the hermit. Before returning to the palace, the emperor wanted to repeat his 3 questions one last time. He found the hermit sowing seeds in the earth they had dug the day before. The hermit stood up and looked at the emperor. "But your questions have already been answered." "How's that?" the emperor asked, puzzled. "Yesterday, if you had not taken pity on my age and given me a hand with digging these beds, you would have been attacked by that man on your way home. Then you would have deeply regretted not staying with me. Therefore, the most important time was the time you were digging in the beds. The most important person was myself, and the most important pursuit was to help me. Later, when the wounded man ran up here, the most important time was the time you spent dressing his wound. For if you had not cared for him, he would have died, and you would have lost the chance to be reconciled with him. Likewise, he was the most important person, and the most important pursuit was taking care of his wound. Remember that there is only one important time, and that is now. The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion. The most important person is always the person you are with, who is right before you, or who knows if you will have dealings with any other person in the future. The most important pursuit is making the person standing at your side happy, for that alone is the pursuit of life. So Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to talk about the service of peace. He says, and you know, Thich Nhat Hanh was a peace activist in every imaginable turn of the word, in every passage, in every imaginable way that those words are used. And he says, Tolstoy is a saint, what we Buddhists would call a bodhisattva, but was the emperor himself able to see the meaning and direction of life? How can we live in the present moment, live right now with the people around us, helping to lessen their suffering and making their lives happier? How? The answer is we must practice mindfulness. So I'm going to leave that for now, unless there are any questions or comments. And I want to turn to the piece, the merging of difference and unity. And I'll explain why. Toward the end of the merging of difference and unity that Steve just finished teaching, it says, each thing appears to have its own intrinsic value, yet is related to everything else in function and position. Phenomena fit absolute, like box and cover joining. Absolute accords the relative, like arrows meeting in air. Hearing these words, you should know the source. Don't set up standards of your own. If you don't see the path as it meets your eyes, how will you know the way as you walk? Practice is not a matter of far or near, but if you are confused, mountains and rivers block the way. I humbly say to those who would awaken, don't waste time. So I feel that the story of the emperor directly addresses this. It says, don't set up standards of your own. So the emperor goes looking for the answers to the three questions to set up some sort of standards. He doesn't see the path as it meets his eyes until the hermit starts to turn his attention toward that. The emperor sees what's right in front of him, which is that the hermit is old and tired and needs some help with his garden. And this goes on, as I described. He sees the path as it meets his eyes, but he doesn't realize it until the hermit says to him, you've answered your own questions. And then it says, he sees the way as he walks. So this is the walking. He takes up the spade. He turns the garden. The hermit draws his attention to the sound of the old man running up to them, wounded. The emperor immediately tends to the man's wounds. And then in the morning, the old man informs him that he was there to kill him. But they're reconciled because they're both able to see what's right of them, right in front of them in that moment. And I find the reconcile very touching, this reconciliation between the man who was going to kill him and the emperor who has waged war, who has been responsible for the murder of others, who has stolen this man's property, and yet they're reconciled because each of them saw what was right in front of them. They could see the way as they walked. And but they did need to hurt the hermit to point that out. However, I also want to point out that as the Buddha says, in which the hermit addressed, he says, as he said to his disciples on his deathbed, be a light unto yourself. Betake yourselves to no external refuge. Hold fast to the truth. Look not for refuge to others besides yourself. And the hermit was pointing this out to him as well. You know the truth. It was right there before your eyes. And you saw the truth, and it guided your actions. And you didn't need priests, soothsayers, administrators, warriors, science, religion. It was right there. And any ideas, he was saying, in effect, that you might have had about how to resolve this issue of seeing the path as it meets your eyes. The hermit pointed out to him, and the emperor lived it, as did the man whom he tended to. While Steve was teaching this, I memorized it. And I would recite it to myself. And it just didn't get any clearer, no matter how many times or how well I could demonstrate to myself that I had it memorized. But this really helped. Don't set up standards of your own. And all that means is, I'm going to get to that. Don't engage in dualistic practice. There was a book I was reading that said that meditation is an inherently dualistic practice. And then this person quoted Suzuki Roshi as saying, we do a dualistic practice with a non-dualistic attitude. And I agree with Suzuki and disagree with the person who says that we do a dualistic practice when we practice meditation, because I don't think Suzuki is saying that we are doing a fundamentally dualistic practice. Otherwise, how could we practice with a non-dual attitude? It would not be possible. It would not be possible. So I just was really struck by that. And I also hadn't realized after all these years on Friday nights of reciting the Fukan Zazengi that Dogen gives some very humorous examples of dualistic practice in the Fukan Zazengi. I wouldn't say hilarious, but we just recited it on Friday night after meditation. So it was fresh in my mind. And he says, the way is basically perfect and all pervading. So this is wholeness, totality. And as the Shin Ming says, nothing is separate, nothing is excluded, including duality. He says the truth vehicle is free and untrammeled. What need is there for one's concentrated effort? The truth is always showing up. We don't need to make any special effort. We just need to be fully present in this moment, to be as Thich Nhat Hanh was saying, and the hermit was saying, mindful, mindfully aware, awake and aware in this moment, as Norm says. Be the awakeness and awareness that you are. So it doesn't need any one's concentrated effort. There is no individual making this effort, although that's dualistic practice, and we get confused, and that's all right, because we can drop that. And then he says, well, he goes on, and in the second paragraph, he says, and yet, if there's the slightest discrepancy in our intention to be awake, the way is as distant as heaven from earth. He says, and here's his examples of dualistic practice. Suppose one gains pride of understanding and inflates one's own enlightenment, glimpsing the wisdom that runs through all things. He's not denying it, but if we're caught up with our own attainments, convinced that we are I don't know, practicing with a gaining idea, attaining the way when there's nothing to attain. It's all here. There's nothing to attain. And clarifying the mind. How could we possibly clarify the mind except in our own dualistic ideas and ideas about separation, ideas about mind. Your mind? My mind? What mind? Can we point to our mind? Anyway, it's raising an aspiration to scale the very sky. So this is a lofty, dualistic ambition. Anyway, he says, one is making initial partial excursions about the frontiers, but is still somewhat deficient in the vital way of total emancipation. So then what do? He says we cease from practice based on intellectual understanding, pursuing words and following after speech, and learn the backward step that turns your light inward to illuminate yourself. And then he says, any dualistic ideas we have will drop away. Body and mind is a dualistic idea, that they're somehow separate. Body and mind of themselves will drop away, and your original face will be manifest. And then he says, if you want to attain suchness, practice suchness without delay. There's no separation there. Just practice it without delay. We're not trying to, he says, have no designs on becoming a Buddha. He also talks about the futility of trying to hang on to anything. This is one of my favorite parts of the Fukansa Zenki. He says, you have gained the pivotal opportunity of human form. In this moment, in each and every moment. Do not use your time in vain. As it says in this, the merging of difference in unity, don't waste time. Don't use your time in vain. You are maintaining the essential working of the way. We're all showing up together in this. This is the way. The way is basically perfect. This is our true nature. He says, the sides, form, and substance are like dew on the grass. Destiny, like the dart of lightning, emptied in an instant, vanished in a flash. I love those words. There's nothing to hold on to there. Emptied in an instant. There's no substance there to grasp, vanished in a flash. Destiny, like the dart of lightning. We hear a lot about destiny. How do we fulfill our potential? You know, there's a lot of self-help. There's a lot of, I don't know, confusing ideas out there. Just be awake, he's saying, just be awake, aware. And then I wanted to turn to Suzuki himself, who is quoted by this person who says that meditation is a dualistic practice. He quotes Suzuki as saying, we do a dualistic practice with a non-dualistic attitude. And as I said before, I don't think Suzuki really is saying that the practice is dualistic. I think he's pointing to, we can approach it with a dualistic attitude, but the practice itself is not fundamentally dualistic. And in fact, I think Suzuki says that in many different ways. And I really like what he says here. He says, so there's nothing to rely. Oh, I'm sorry. This is in Not Always So. We've used this in practice period. And I haven't read it in a long time. And I was just sort of thumbing through it, looking for, because it's all over Suzuki, what Suzuki writes. But anyway, he says, so there is nothing to rely on in our practice. That sounds scary. Steve Matushek has talked about this. But on the other hand, there is always something provided for you. Always. According to the circumstances, according to what is showing up, you will have some aid to practice our way. Even the pain in your legs is an aid. By the pain you have, you practice our way. We want to get rid of the pain, but Suzuki is saying even the pain supports our practice because it brings our attention right here. And we can use that pain. We can not use it so much as be very aware of it, notice it, pay attention to it, treat it like it was a child and we were going to take care of it. This is the aid to, this is how pain in our legs is an aid. By the pain you have, you practice our way. We don't have to condemn ourselves for experiencing physical pain in practice or emotional pain or whatever pain might show up, whatever suffering. He says, by the pain you have, you practice our way. The pain is it. It is everything. But at the time, it is but at that time, it is some definite experience or particular trouble. It can be drowsiness. It can be hunger. It can be hot weather. I've spoken before about being plagued with drowsiness for years in meditation. I can remember attending Genzo Sesshin with Okamura years ago, and I was the chant leader. This is before I developed problems with my vocal cord. And so I'm sitting right behind, right next to Shohaku Okamura. And I'm sitting there staring at the wall, falling asleep, rousing myself, falling asleep, rousing myself. And I know this must have gone on for hours, happened over and over again. And there was just the coming back. What else could I do? There's nothing else to do. That's the great thing about Zazen. There's nothing else to do. Nothing. And so at the end of this, Shohaku Okamura, we're downstairs. I'll never forget it. He comes up to me and he says, thank you for your practice. It was very moving. I was grateful. I was grateful. In some ways, I imagine the emperor felt that kind of gratitude toward the hermit. Anyway, so hot weather or nice cool weather or hunger or mosquitoes or the pain in your legs can be an aid to your practice with which you can stand up and establish your practice. So it's actually the foundation of your practice in that moment. Nothing to hold on to, but nothing to get rid of. And he says, emo G, that's IMMO hyphen G, JI, means things. And emo, IMMO hyphen nin, is someone who is practicing zazen. Someone practicing something. That is reality. Or we could say someone doing something. Then emo is a discontinuous particular being, which has form and color. But as Dogen Zenji says, Zen practice is something continuous, something mixed up with everything. If it is so, then someone doing Zazen, which we think of as dualistic, already includes everything. Everything. Someone cannot be separate from the world. Some action cannot exist without the background of the whole world. The emperor could not have learned what he learned without the background of the whole world showing up in that moment to help him answer those three questions. Some action cannot exist without the background of the whole world, and something cannot be apart from other things. There is no duality, no separation. It's just that we think that and we cling to that. And we can just let it go. So he says, someone doing something is the same thing, you know. If they are the same thing, then we can say something, something, something. I like the way he sort of reduces it just to which it looks, you just can't, what can you say about that? What is that? He asks. Good question. That is complete realization. Everything happens in this way. So if you stick to the idea of help or enlightenment, that is already a mistake. You have separated yourself from everything. So we are the pain in our legs. We are the drowsiness. We are the awakeness. We are the peacefulness. We are the awareness that we are sitting with others. When I sit on a Friday night, just being aware of the presence. And so I'm there as the Doan. Dave is over there. And generally there's Catherine and I'm sorry. No, Bill's generally over there. And Bill Lampy is generally sitting there. And just being aware that they're there. It's so supportive. It feels so supportive of my practice. I'm sorry, I'm a little, I never sleep well before a talk. So sometimes I get a little addled. But just that awareness, just, I don't know how to describe it. Norm, the doshi, Steve, the teacher, their presence is supportive. I can't really describe how. Anyway, it's almost 1:45 and I'm done. Questions, comments? Yes,
That Tolstoy story was very interesting, and there was something about the fact that the emperor didn't have to, it's just what we do. He, like if the hermit had just told him what he told him
right,
after
right.
what had happened, I don't think he would have heard it.
Yes,
You know, I think
Yes.
that it took the actual doing of it,
Yes.
the actual experience of life, and then the hermit just pointing out to him what had just happened.
yes,
You know, there was something about that fact that the emperor really
yes,
experienced
yes,
what it was that then the hermit was pointing out to him, that I think was the wisdom
Absolutely.
for the emperor.
Abs- I appreciated the hermit's wisdom, his ability, he didn't show off. He could have answered the question. He could have come up with something. He could have played wise man, but he didn't. He let, as we do in Zazen, things unfold. I agree totally. I don't mean to take away from anything you said.
Yeah, it was perhaps the fact that the emperor was asking those questions,
Yes,
those particular questions where the hermit could trust
yes,
to let the emperor.
yes,
Yeah,
that's true. The emperor was, I don't know, he seemed spiritually inclined. He seemed aware at some level of his true nature, and his reconciliation with him, his treasuring that he could reconcile with a former enemy by actually helping him. I was thinking about reconciliation recently. I had an email exchange that I misinterpreted, and it was pointed out to me that I did not read carefully what was written in the email. And it was true. I went back and reread it, and I had missed a crucial word. And I acknowledged this in my response, and I felt so relieved that I was able to acknowledge that I had not seen the word, the key word, and there had therefore misunderstood and misrepresented to myself what was being said. And then when this was pointed out to me in a response email, I was able to acknowledge that. And it felt like a wonderful reconciliation. So,
I appreciated your talk and sharing the story of the 3 questions. When our daughter was young, we had a children's book that was the 3 questions. That was always one of my favorite ones to read to her, but it wasn't one of her favorites. So I had to notice the times that I was trying to, assert my preferences over hers in terms of which book we were choosing. But and what you said too about the support from sitting with others. I live here in Oklahoma, and there's no Zen center here, and so for years sitting by myself. And recently, sometimes Jonathan will come over and we'll sit together. But over this holiday, the adult children of a friend of mine have been visiting her, and I knew them when they were young. And she mentioned to me that they were all meditating these days and asked if they could come over and sit with me. And so they have. It's just been very, just really wonderful. Just really wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. I can imagine it was really wonderful. Yes. Okay, be patient with me. My eyes are driving me crazy. So I just hope I don't keel over. Help me not keel over. Okay.